to empower Canada's workforce. I'm Gazella Knight and serve as a policy analyst for the Government and Public Affairs team at the Future Skills Centre. To walk us through our agenda today, this will be a 90-minute webinar and we'll begin with some framing and introductory content to help shape our discussion. This will be followed up by a presentation on some of the research findings and an in-the-field discussion and Q&A, which will address the latest research and success stories from FSC's funded projects. Then we will close our conversation with some final remarks. And to situate us today, I acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, also known to some as Toronto. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. As our work takes place across Turtle Island, we also acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play on these lands, and commit to learning about our shared histories and breathing life into the journey of reconciliation. A little housekeeping, a reminder that today's session will be recorded, and a copy will be available to everyone who is registered in the following days. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to comment and ask questions. Please refrain from using the chat as we've designed this process to be most efficient using the Q&A function. You will see a Zoom toolbar with the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our communications team will be monitoring it closely and is eagerly looking forward to interacting with you. A reminder that this is a bilingual event. To select your preference of English or French, please turn on the interpretation button on the bottom of your Zoom, located at the bottom. We also wanted to bring your attention to a peer learning group opportunity, a space for expert facilitated breakout room discussions to share actionable insights, tips, and resources on newcomer employment and integration. This is taking place virtually next week, August 28th at 11 a.m. Moving on to our poll that will pop up on your screen in a moment, we're curious to know what you believe to be true. What percentage of newcomers say that their foreign work experience isn't valued by employers in Canada? So we'll leave a few moments, about 30 seconds now, to answer. You should see it pop up on your screen now. Again, the options are 37%, 53%, 12%, and 98%. Now, so as you can see, most believe that it is 52%. Or sorry, 53%, 52% of you believe that. And to answer the question, it is actually a staggering 37%. This comes from the latest wave, 7th, of our survey on employment and skills, which we've been running since 2020 with the Environics Institute for Survey Research and the Diversity Institute. Stay tuned for more results from this survey in the coming weeks and months. As we exhale from such a disheartening statistic, to say the least, now let's do something about it. Future Skills Centre believes in utilizing newcomer skills to create opportunity for Canadian businesses, ultimately helping to achieve Canada's economic, environmental, and societal goals. To speak to this on a greater scale, I'd like to introduce Dr. Wendy Sukier, founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute, academic director of the Women Entrepreneurship Hub, who also serves as the academic research director of the Future Skills Centre. Wendy.
Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And I'll start by sharing my screen. hoping that is coming through. So my name is Wendy Sucure. I'm from the Diversity Institute, and I want to set a bit of context for our very interesting conversation today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from the panelists, who are the main show, and as well as the participants. But I've been asked to provide a bit of context. So just a bit about the Diversity Institute. This is our 25th year. We've been working on creating pathways to employment, entrepreneurship, and focused on the full range of equity deserving groups for a number of years. We have 100 full-time research staff. We're part of Toronto Metropolitan University, which is one of the key partners in the Future Skills Center. But we also work on a number of other projects, and I'll draw on some of that, including the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and Canada's 50/30 Challenge. So I think everyone on the call knows these basic points, but it's worth reiterating that in Canada, all workforce growth will come through migration. And the ability to attract and retain a skilled workforce is key, not just to our economic well-being and innovation, but also to our social and cultural fabric. Global competition is becoming very acute, especially for people with at the high end of the skill spectrum. And we've heard stories about places like Japan and other countries which historically have not had very generous immigration policies, and how hard that's hitting them in terms of productivity. And in Canada right now, even though immigrants are about 20% between 20 and 25% of the workforce, they account for 40% of science, technology, engineering, and math workers in Canada. They're also more likely to be entrepreneurs. And we know that entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of the Canadian economy, because most jobs in Canada in the private sector are with small, medium enterprises. What's also important to know is that immigrants are often pushed into self-employment and entrepreneurship because they are excluded from the regular job market. At the same time, we know that many are pulled and that they have real assets to bring to innovation. As I said, SMEs are the lifeblood of the Canadian economy, even though many organizations tend to focus on what large employers need. More than between 50 and 80% of private sector employment is actually with small, medium enterprises, some of them very small, and all of them report labor shortages as being a key competitive issue, regardless of their size. We also know that there has been a lot of discussion around immigration levels, whether they're too high or not. And I don't really want to get into that today, other than to say I think there's been a lot of misrepresentation of the data in the media. And everybody, for example, or many people, for example, have focused on the huge spike that we saw post-COVID. But it's really important to remember, if you look at 2022 and the increase, how that in some ways is just compensating for the massive drops in 2020 and 2021. And I really think that this is a conversation for another day, but we have to try to rest our arguments about public policy, about levels of appropriate levels of immigration on some of these facts. We also know that when we think about small, medium enterprises, when we think about entrepreneurs, their needs in terms of labor, in terms of skills development, and so on, depend very much on what stage of development they're at, as well as the sector they're in, as well as their geographic context. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that we've seen with respect to employer needs. When we think about barriers to newcomers, there are a number of different issues that have been raised. I mean, part of it is, some would argue, misalignment between policies and processes and outcomes. And that doesn't just apply to, for example, the point system and the misalignment in some respects between what's prioritized and what's needed by employers. Trades, for example, are often under prioritized, but it also applies to the design and implementation of programs intended to support newcomers. We also know there are barriers to education. Education is the strongest predictor of social mobility in Canada. I'm very proud of that. But what that means is, if newcomers are facing barriers in education, if the children of newcomers are not getting the support that they need to be successful, that has long-term impacts. I am really bullish on confronting the fact that we invest an enormous amount in language training, French and English in this country. And the Auditor General of Ontario suggested that people would learn more English driving cab. In many cases, we really have to grapple with that. We have to leverage everything we know about what works to ensure that when people are spending time trying to learn the language, they have the support and tools that they need to be effective. We know devaluation of foreign credentials is massive, and the stories of engineers and doctors driving cab are not urban legends. It's true. We also know that immigrants tend to be underemployed, that a quarter of them with bachelor's degrees or higher are working in jobs that require only high school diploma. On the other hand, we know that work integrated learning programs, and I know you'll hear more about those, as well as other innovative approaches, are incredibly effective. The problem is often accessibility of those programs that work, as well as appropriate wraparound supports. Often the things that work are more expensive, but we have to keep a laser focus on outcomes. And the outcomes we want for training programs are employment. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. There's a lack of coordination, there's fragmentation, there's need to help people navigate the skills and employment system. And of course, in Canada, social capital and informal networks are critically important. You know, people sometimes say your network is your net worth, and nowhere is that more true than when we look at immigrants, and we have really good data on that. You know, the experience, for example, with privately sponsored refugees versus government-sponsored refugees in terms of settlement has a lot to do with the social capital that sponsored refugees have. We know that, as I said, the quality of training programs is really uneven. And whether we're talking about post-secondary institutions, whether we're talking about immigrant serving organizations, whether we're talking about private colleges, there are a lot of predatory programs. Universities and colleges offer bridging programs that lead nowhere in many cases. And we have to, I think, all embrace accountability and impact in order to make sure we're making the best use of resources. We also see that often entrepreneurship is viewed as a last resort as opposed to a desirable pathway. And we have evidence to suggest that that should be reconsidered. In fact, entrepreneurship training is not only a good way, obviously, to create the next generation of small business owners, but it's an incredibly powerful and engaging form of experiential learning. And that is especially important when you think of the mental health of many immigrants who come to this country with promises where they're going to use their skills, and then they're stuck in classrooms for eight months learning English. So we're really interested in innovative approaches that address the mental health issues that we know are challenges for many newcomers as they're adapting to Canada. And there is no doubt, and we have so much evidence to support this, that bias and discrimination, particularly racism, are big issues in the workplace. And that intersectionality is an important lens. The experience, for example, of Black Muslim immigrants, completely different to those from Western Europe, for example. We know that women's experience is different, and we know, depending on lived experience, trauma can be a massive issue that needs to be addressed with appropriate supports. We're not going to talk about this today, but I would say, regardless of what we agree on or disagree on, one of the things we should recognize is this is the single biggest threat we face in terms of designing and implementing effective programs to support immigrants. And that is, and I would argue a lot of it is based on misinformation, but that is the fact that the levels of agreement with the statement immigration levels are too high in the last surveys that have come out is higher than we have seen in 25 years. And that should be a major concern because it affects the commitment, resources to programs to support newcomers, but it also affects how they're treated in the workplace. And we know this very clearly from work that Tony Fang has done out of Memorial University, where he surveyed small, medium enterprises. And we're trying to replicate this study on a national basis. But what's so interesting about this is, you know, the expression, try it, you'll like it. We see that employers who hire immigrants hire more immigrants. And employers who haven't hired immigrants often have more negative views of immigrant capacity. There's huge differences between those who hire immigrants and those don't in terms of their attitudes. So when you think of those big shifts in public opinion, we know that that will translate into changes in the workplace, and we have to be prepared to combat those the misinformation and the wrong assumptions about what the impacts are. We also have to recognize that this is a global competition, and we're seeing, you know, people are talking about we need to cut immigration levels. Well, there are lots of immigrants who agree, who are leaving as fast as they're coming. And that is a real threat that we have to consider, especially when we're talking about high-skilled newcomers. So when we think at the Future Skills Center about what needs to happen to create an inclusive innovation, employment, and skills system, we have to recognize that the issues operate at different levels. Policies and culture and values and stereotypes, for example, at the societal level, as well as socioeconomic trends, are very, very important to keep track of. Then we have to think about who the stakeholders are within the ecosystem, and that includes not just the funders or the service providers or the providing supports, but it also obviously includes the supply, the job seekers and the skills that they have, and the employers, their capacity to absorb and utilize the skills that immigrants bring. Sorry, was someone trying to interrupt? Okay, apologies. So the Future Skills Center has a ton of work on immigration. You're just going to hear a little bit about it today, and people will get copies of the slides, so I won't go through this in detail, but it ranges from everything from how to integrate cooks and truck drivers all the way up to AI professionals with deep technology skills. It covers the entire country. You know, we have IECBC in the FAST program in the West Coast. We have a number of really innovative programs in the East Coast that you'll also hear about, and everything in between. And the programs that we're doing take an intersectional lens. So they recognize that the needs of newcomer women or Black newcomers are going to be very different than others. And again, too many words. It's very busy, but just so you understand, we have a very integrated notion of what we need to be thinking about as in terms of inputs and activities and what we're looking for as outcomes. And I lead something called the Pathways to Employment program, which has many sub-projects within it. What we found is we need a laser focus on employers. And we did an ecosystem mapping and found there are still a lot of programs ostensibly aimed at supporting newcomers that don't actually have strong relationships with employers. And what that means is they can be training people for imaginary jobs because employers are not at the center of the work that we're doing. We have no way of ensuring that we're meeting their needs, or we're going to be successful in our efforts to help newcomers achieve economic integration. We also have to keep in mind, and again, I've said this a couple of times already, small, medium enterprises account for the majority of private sector jobs in this country. Often we focus on what the big banks say or the big IT companies or whatever. Of course, they're important, but the mom and pop shops in Picton, Ontario, and Thunder Bay, St. John's, Newfoundland, Moosonee, and whatever are also really important, as are all the small, medium enterprises in manufacturing and food processing, et cetera. And yet these companies often are most reliant on informal networks and therefore don't tap into immigrant talent. And I have, we've been doing a lot of work with Ontario Chambers of Commerce. And one of the things that really sticks in my mind is an example that a small business in Picton cited. And they said, we couldn't get people. We'd advertise, we'd set up appointments, and we'd get ghosted. I thought that only happened in dating, but it happens now in the job search process, where employers set up appointments with prospective employees and they don't even come. They did one thing. They added a line to their advertisements saying, "Internationally educated professionals welcome." One line to their job ads. They doubled the number of applicants and dramatically improved the quality of talent that they had access to. Anything we can do to help small, medium enterprises improve their capacity to expand the pool becomes very important. And that's why we can't just focus on, quote, fixing the immigrants. We have to really focus on employers and creating inclusive workplaces. And so that's really what underpins the work that we're doing at the Diversity Institute. We look at learners, we look at learners' want, we look at the job market, we design programs, wraparound supports, but we also work with employers to ensure we understand what they need and that they are going to be able to retain newcomers when they bring them in. Because if they don't have inclusive environments, if they hire Muslims and play Christmas carols all through December, they're going to have problems. And there's lots and lots that can be done there. We also are very dependent on technology, and many of you know about Magnet, which provides a platform linking employers, job seekers, and so on. We recently acquired MyStarter, which was developed by Mars Innovation and led by large employers like Starbucks and Home Depot and Bell Canada and so on. And we try to integrate as much as we can. And those who know Magnet know that it has really become the glue that is knitting, no, bad metaphor, the platform that is linking many components within the skills and employment ecosystem together to try to reduce the duplication and the fragmentation, because you may have a job seeker, and especially now that we have more remote work, you may well have a job seeker in Newfoundland that can fulfill the needs of a company that's in Calgary without moving. And we have to have better ways of making those connections. And we can talk more about that. Lots and lots of partners. And we're really doubling down on this notion of inclusive career pathing. What does that mean? What that means is, providing good content and teaching in training programs, really important, because that helps develop capital, human capital and skills. But that is only one step in the process. When you're dealing with marginalized populations, in particular refugees, for example, helping actually develop their confidence to come into the training programs is massive. Developing self-efficacy, helping navigate the options, ensuring there are wraparound supports that reduce barriers and so on, are all also very important, as is sustaining support once they go into employment. And we have tons of programs. We don't have time to talk about them, but I wanted to focus in my last minute or so on a couple. The Advanced Digital and Professional Training Program is an employer-centered program. It's online, it's in person, it's asynchronous, synchronous, and so on. But we have managed to achieve an 88% placement rate with newcomers as well as with non-newcomers. Massive. And a lot has to do not with the training content, but with the relationships we have with employers and the customized wraparound supports. We also see that newcomers often benefit more than Canadian-born participants in terms of their assessments of improvements in their skills. And again, don't have time to talk about the Lifeline Challenge, which is focused specifically on refugees, primarily Afghan and Ukrainian refugees, is teaching us a lot about trauma-informed approaches and the different supports that refugees require. Again, working with Magnet, we've supported 300 job seekers and are getting them interview ready and into the system. Our diversity assessment tool is designed to help employers implement appropriate practices around their recruitment, their retention, their development, and so on of newcomers. Again, we've covered every single sector, and we've worked with more than 300 small, medium enterprises and about 50 large businesses to improve their equity, diversity, and inclusion practices and expand their hiring pools and more. The Newcomer Entrepreneurship Hub with Scanning Court focuses on entrepreneurship. And I explained previously that it's not because we think all these newcomers will necessarily become owners of small businesses. It's because we know that the skills that they develop in entrepreneurship training, language skills, communication skills, how to pitch, how to engage, cultural knowledge, financial literacy, and so on, are absolutely transferable to other jobs. And so far, 200 have participated in the program, and it gives them lots of mentoring and support. And again, we see massive evidence of self-reported improvement of skills ranging from business knowledge through to personal networks and connections. So when we think about what works, we need to think about navigation and integration and one-stop shopping. We need to recognize the diversity of newcomers. We need to understand that work-integrated learning is one of the most powerful tools available, because when employers hire newcomers, they hire more newcomers. And that's one of the most important things that we need to think about. You'll hear a lot more about things like pre-arrival training and how to design programs effectively. But the last thing I want to say is that we have to focus on supply and demand. We have to focus on accountability among service providers, but we really, really have to keep employers at the center and telling them that they should hire immigrants for social justice reasons is not going to cut it. We have to show them that hiring immigrants will help their bottom line. And we have to really fight that, the misinformation, and make sure that we continue to reinforce the narrative that immigrants drive Canada's economic success. So thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Wendy, for what you have dubbed the way forward for newcomers in our economy. To continue this conversation, I'd like to invite Laura McDonough, Associate Director of Knowledge Mobilization and Insights from the Future Skills Center, who will be moderating today's panel.
Thank you so much, Gazala. Always a pleasure to hear you speak, Wendy. Every time you do, I learn a few things. So I was taking copious notes for laying the groundwork there. I want to introduce first our panel here. Rania Yunus, Senior Manager, National Partnerships and Engagement, Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. She's going to be followed by Rachel Crow, Senior Project Manager of the Career Advancement for Immigrant Professionals at the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. And then last but not least, we'll have Alexandra Stefanovich Chafe, who's a faculty researcher and at the Job Transitions Pathways Project in Newfoundland and Labrador for their Workforce Innovation Center at the College of the North Atlantic. So we'll start with Rania. Introduce yourself, your organization. Tell us a bit about the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Laura. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And as Laura said, my name is Rania, and I'm the Senior Manager of National Partnerships and Engagement at IECBC. I'm really honored to be here today to share insights into the Facilitating Access for Skilled Talent, or better known as the FAST project, a cornerstone of our efforts to support skilled immigrants as they integrate in the Canadian workplace. A little about IECBC, for those who don't know us, would probably also answer a couple of the questions that I'm seeing pop up. Our key mandate is to provide BC employers with essential tools, solutions, and resources needed to attract, hire, and retain qualified immigrant talent. We offer employer-focused resources and programs that assist businesses across all sizes and sectors, helping them to integrate skilled immigrants into their workplace effectively, and thereby improving the employment outcomes for immigrants. The FAST program, which is one of the FSC-funded programs, was co-designed with employers and subject matter experts for that matter. It was launched as a pilot in 2015, focusing on skilled trades in BC, and the program has since grown into a national initiative supporting immigrants across multiple sectors such as IT, biotechnology, life sciences, finance, culinary arts, and more. In 2020, we were fortunate to receive funding from FSC, which has enabled us to expand and enhance the program significantly. The program supports the funding allowed us to reach more immigrants nationwide, developing tools and resources to better serve both newcomers and Canadian employers. It is designed to tackle major challenges like the lack of recognition for international credentials and limited Canadian workplace experience among immigrants. If you're not familiar with FAST, it's a free online self-paced employment preparation program for skilled immigrants, aiming to find jobs across 6 key sectors at the moment. It has achieved considerable success, evidenced by strong interest and participation from both newcomers and employers. Our employment outcomes for participants have shown remarkable improvement, with employment rates climbing from 45% at program exit to 72 9 months later. The improvements also reflected a job quality and weekly earnings improvement. Notably, the program has also driven systemic change in regions like New Brunswick, where it has become an integral part of broader workforce strategies, more specifically in the skilled trades. Collaboration has been a key element to our success. We partner with organizations like Diversity Institute, Blueprint, and over 40 or so SPOs nationwide to complement and enhance our offerings always, and integrating best practices from the sector and the broader FSC community as well. This commitment to continuous learning and improvement is fundamental to our program and to the team at IECBC for the FAST program in particular. And in sum, to kind of wrap it up, FAST, while it has gained its popularity in the pre-arrival space, it's more than just a pre-arrival service. It's an essential tool for empowering immigrants and aiding employers in creating more inclusive and skilled workforce. And I look forward to discussing the program further with Laura and the panel and the audience, and hearing your insights on how we can continue to enhance and expand that effort. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to go to Rachel.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here today. My name is Rachel Crow, and I'm the Senior Project Manager for the CAPE program, otherwise known as the Career Advancement for Immigrant Professionals program. So like Rania's program, we were first funded in 2020, and we've received some subsequent funding. We wanted to address specifically immigrant career advancement. We knew that from the research that there tends not to be many programs or resources out there for newcomers once they get that first job, but that in fact newcomers face barriers in advancing their careers. They tend to be less able to advance and move as high in organizations as Canadian-born counterparts, and we saw this as being really important to address. We had tested out a very small pilot program prior to our funding from FSC, and the funding allowed us to build out the program. And what we saw as being really important for this program was to not just work with newcomers, but to also work with managers and organizations, seeing that the individuals by themselves can only do so much, and really taking a systems approach. So wanting to change the system, as well as helping individuals navigate career advancement. So what we've done is actually go into specific organizations and work with leaders, and also work with managers and newcomer immigrant professional employees. And by working at those multiple levels, we actually did see changes. So we delivered workshops to the immigrants and managers, and we saw an increase in people's ability to navigate career advancement if they were immigrant professionals. For managers, they reported being better equipped to support newcomer employees with navigating career advancement. In both cases, people were able to take action, and we have been doing the one-year follow-ups for the programs that we've been delivering, and we are seeing that people are continuing to apply the learnings, and in fact, newcomers have been advancing in their organizations. The other piece that we were testing out, and we've been really excited to be able to report some success with, is influencing change at the organizational level. It's great to have change at the individual level, but we want to have that wider change, that bigger impact. And what we were seeing is that by designing a process where we were engaging leadership from the beginning and engaging them throughout our process, we were actually seeing at the end of the program, employers telling us how they have implemented the insights from the program at an organizational level, to affect people who would never be in the program. And that was really exciting to see as well. I should mention also that I'm with TRIAC, which is based in Toronto. We are the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, and we work with employers in the GTA to help them better leverage the skills and talents of immigrant professionals. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And now over to Alexandra, and then we'll get into some discussion. I can see lots of questions coming in through the chat already. You're on mute, Alexandra.
Classic. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I am here to talk about Newcomer Employment Resilience Network project that I was part of and collaborated on with the Association for New Canadians Career and Employment Services Division. I was there as an independent consultant. We collaboratively put in a proposal for this project, and my role was to conduct a needs assessment early in the project, support the project throughout, and conduct developmental evaluation as well as final evaluation at the end after 2 years. So the Career and Employment Division of the Association for New Canadians was very lucky to receive this funding from Future Skills Center in 2020, much like other organizations and projects. Briefly, Association for New Canadians, for those who are not familiar, it's been operating for over 40 years in Newfoundland and Labrador as the only settlement orientation and integration organization for newcomers, providing a number of different services and really growing in the last several years simply because the number of immigrants coming to Newfoundland has increased. I think in the last year, we had over 5,000 newcomers arrive, which is a significant change from 2020 or just before that, where it was under 1,000. So you can see that the increase of demand for services is significant. There is a real emphasis from the government of Newfoundland and Labrador to invite and bring more newcomers and internationally trained professionals to our province. The reason for Newcomer Employment Resilience Network was quite obvious to us when COVID began. We very quickly realized that for those newcomers who are either just about to enter the labor market or are in those entry-level positions and had started their positions, it was really challenging to either make connections or to have the onboarding and the supports from their employers that would ordinarily happen in normal circumstances when everything shut down and when we all isolated during that time. So we wanted to focus on establishing networks and connecting those newcomers with employers in 3 particular sectors. It was financial sector, oil and gas sector, natural resources, and finance sector. We really were hoping for that targeted approach because a number of reasons, but the sectors were experiencing different fluctuations as well. So natural resources sectors had slowed down. So for a lot of newcomers, highly educated, engineers looking for work or having started work at the time, it was really difficult to maintain the skills and the connectivity to the sector due to potential layoffs. The IT sector was booming, so the demand had grown at the time, and the finance sector was also in need of more workers, especially entry-level workers. So there were particular reasons for those sectors, and I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of networks later in the panel. But I want to say that in over 2 years, we brought together over 300, almost 300 individuals. So we engaged 60 different businesses, organizations, and employers in the province, and around 170 newcomers who were really active in all the activities as part of the Newcomer Employment Resilience Network, which involved mentorship. So there was almost 50 mentorships, so 100 people connected in 3-month mentorship. We had networking events, forums. We had skills development that was in response to the demands we could see through networking events and what the participants were telling us. So the connections were made, the relationships were built throughout those 2 years that continued once the project was over. So much so that the Association for New Canadians is now doing employer engagement on that was part of the Association for New Canadian Strategy, but now it's increased. But now there's a core network of employers who is continuously participating in events, organizing in-house tours, and is really actively engaged in supporting newcomer employment. I'm going to stop here and I can talk a little bit more about this later during our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I can see lots of questions coming in through the chat, which is great, and we're going to get to some of those. But we're going to start off with a couple of questions to the group. The first one, I'm going to start with you, Rania, and afterwards, other folks can chime in. But you talk a little bit more about the experiences trying to engage employers in your work. We heard from Wendy about the challenge of getting employers involved. Getting them to the table, keeping them at the table, getting them involved in all aspects. So, what's worked well? What's been challenging? What have you tried to overcome some of the barriers that were very clearly laid out in the previous presentation?
Great question. It's something we work on all the time. I guess it's kind of our bread and butter, day in, day out. Most immigrant employment councils, this is what they focus on. So TRIAC, it would be the same thing as well. As mentioned earlier, that's pretty much what our mandates usually start. And we find that employers really do appreciate being part of the process. And it ensures that the skills that we're assessing or that that we're trying to develop are aligned with the real world industry needs and the changing industry needs as well. But of course, one of the major challenges we faced is getting employers to commit time and resources. Wendy alluded to that as well, particularly when they're unfamiliar with the potential of the immigrant talent, or they're failing to understand their experience and credentials. And I see a lot of questions out there about like, what is this thing about credentials and all? I don't really think employers kind of really are trying to say, oh, I just need to understand your certification. I think it's a lack of understanding of the context of your credentials and experience. And to overcome this, we focused on showcasing success stories, case studies that demonstrate the tangible benefits employers have seen by hiring immigrants and fast participants, and providing employers with tailored supports and resources that can help them build these relationships and get a better understanding of the talent pool they're working within. Moreover, I think it's also very important to realize that sometimes employers themselves don't recognize their own challenges all the time. They're really unable to pinpoint specific issues that hinder their workforce development. And we've addressed this by really cultivating genuine relationships and showing real interest and investing in their business success, which helps them navigate and address these workforce challenges more. I think like we hear over and over from employers, this is, it's not just about doing the right thing, but doing the right thing for your business. And the reality is immigrants do bring great value to businesses. And that's the part that we try to focus on the most. Takes time, but we try.
Rachel or Alexandra, who wants to go next? How about you? How about we'll go to Alexandra, and then Rachel, you're going to get the first kick at the next question. So Alexandra.
Sure, thank you. I completely agree with Rania, and I really don't have that much to add. It is the time and resources. We know employers are busy, so when we reach out and try to connect, it's really them looking at this relationship and saying, well, how do I benefit from this? This is what they're thinking about. But in fact, there is a huge benefit to connecting to an organization that has a number of supports for them. And not to mention having access to an incredible talent that they may not be aware of. I think the difference also can be between a larger organization that has a number of, it has a really big HR department and has the resources to provide training and onboarding. And then there's a small and medium business. Um, during our project, we really tried to have a balance of both because we knew that, well, newcomers are looking for different jobs in different organizations. But we wanted to support small and medium businesses who needed that help and that connection, so that they can also benefit from the talent that's there. So it is about raising awareness of the supports and services that immigrant organizations have to support employers, and also awareness of the talent that exists. Those are, I think, the key aspects for employers.
Rachel, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So Alexandra and Rania, you've covered a lot of great pieces. Just think I'll touch on two different aspects of this. So with our program, there was certainly trying to engage employers at the beginning of our project. And then there was the piece about trying to influence change once we had started working with organizations. So as Rania mentioned, both of my organization, hers, the main focus is to engage with employers. So this is something we reflect on a lot and try to really work on. What we have found to be helpful, I think one thing that's also shifted, I've been at TRIAC for about 10 years, and I'm starting to see more of a shift in some of the conversations that we're having with employers. So more and more employers are realizing that diversity coming from immigrants is the reality. In the GTA, it's 50% or more of people who live here. So employers are starting to realize, not everybody, but this is the reality, but that the inclusion and belonging piece, the really leveraging the people who are there, that's a choice. And employers are starting to realize that they need help with that. And we're seeing that in some of our conversations. I think certainly looking at organizations where leadership is enthusiastic about newcomer inclusion, if you can find an organization that has identified immigrant inclusion as a priority, that's great. It hasn't really been on organizations' radars up till this point, but within the last year, we actually came across two organizations we hadn't worked before that had identified in their EDI strategy, and it was posted on the website, that immigrant inclusion was a priority for them. So that certainly made the conversation a lot easier. And then one thing that's, well, in terms of actually getting those relationships sort of building over time and building that trust is important. But if you have, say, board members who can introduce you to employers, that warm introduction helps a lot. A piece of feedback from one of our employer partners last year. He mentioned that he really appreciated that we came to them with a need clearly identified, a business need for them, and that we had developed a very clear and straightforward process, a solution, and also just a very easy process for coming in and working with them. And because it was so clear, it really helped him see the value, but also to go to the people he needed to make the argument for bringing us in. And in terms of influencing the change, once we started working with employers, really it came down to a few things. We built trust over time. We were able to show that we had a very high caliber program. We were able to show that we had strong evaluation results from their people. And so when we came to our final meeting with the organization, with the leaders, and we had a report to share insights from the program, they were more open to hearing what we were saying, what we had to say, and they were much more open to our recommendations. And so I think that's why we were more likely to actually hear back later that they had taken what we had shared and implemented that in the organization.
Thank you so much for
I'll
those
leave it there.
fulsome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Rachel. So the next question I want to put to the group is if you could spend a couple of minutes talking about, aside from employer engagement, what some of the challenges are that you encountered in implementing these projects and what you've done to address them, or, if they endure. And I just want to add to that a little bit because I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about the role of sort of, Canadian workplace culture and the role of discrimination and racism and bias showing up in those things. So if any of your challenges pertain to this, I think that could address some of the questions that we see coming in through the chat. And I'm going to go back to Rachel to start this one.
Well, I hadn't so discrimination is absolutely a problem. And I think what can be challenging is certainly going into organizations and seeing, depending on where an employee is situated in the organization and their manager, because managers are really influence an individual's experience in the organization. Some people being in truly difficult and really toxic situations sometimes. And it can be challenging as someone external who can see this and wondering how to support that person. I think in our case, our role is to help people better understand the context they're in. For a lot of the newcomers we were working with, it was their first job in Canada, and we were starting off in the pandemic. So the folks that we were working with were working remotely. And so to get the context of whether or not your everyday experience is normal, or if this is what working in Canada is actually like, I think for a lot of people that was challenging. So I think because we were facilitating discussion with a group, people were able to see, oh, actually this isn't so normal when my manager is telling me I'm not allowed to take a lunch break and whatever the thing was. So, trying to grapple with how we could support within sort of our limited capacity, and trying to find ways to make sure that we are helping everybody. In terms of implementing the program, one thing that we certainly were challenged with was in partnering with employers. We have sort of limited access to people, and we are very dependent on our champion or our main contact. And sometimes we'd get people who were really on the ball and they were able to very quickly get back to us on things. And then other times we had individuals who we found were doing this off the side of their desk, and we'd send off emails and we wouldn't hear from them. So in terms of us working with employers, we found as we went, we would really be intentional about building relationships with different touch points along the way with different people. And of course, as appropriate, asking, if we have a question about whatever, can we get back to you directly, or can we reach out to you? Might, your involvement later in the project be of interest, and trying to make sure that we're building those relationships so that we're not dependent on just one person. Certainly survey responses to our evaluation was really challenging. I don't know if others found that, but we ended up just building that into our sessions to make it mandatory, keeping it really short. And then when we had really critical evaluation information we needed, providing some financial incentives sometimes, that really helped. And I would just say the last thing was sometimes keeping people's attention in the session. So in one organization, it was normal culture for them to be in 2 to 3 meetings at a time in their everyday work life. So being in our training meant less divided attention. And so we addressed that by simply going to our champion and asking them to talk to someone senior in the department, higher than the managers, to send out messaging around how the training needed to be prioritized, and people should just be focused on attending the session. So that certainly helped.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm going to go to Rania next.
So plus one to everything Rachel said, basically, but more specifically for FAST, I would say digital literacy among or the levels of digital literacy among participants, especially because of the way FAST is delivered. It requires a certain level of comfort with technology and familiarity with technology as well. I'm not unnecessarily at all saying that most newcomers don't come here with a level of they are very technologically fluent, but most of the time it's just that comfort with various platforms. But to address this, we've incorporated digital literacy supports in our onboarding process and ensuring that participants have the necessary skills and sometimes even equipment required to navigate the platform. That's why we particularly really appreciate partnerships and achievements of programs like ADAPT that have brought much value and insight in that area. Another challenge is it's really a challenge for within the settlement and immigration space. It's not necessarily unique to FAST, but it's been the initial lack of awareness among of the program itself among newcomers, which we've continued to address this with working closely with partners and service providing organizations who are integral really to the program delivery, and they're more equipped to reach potential participants early in the settlement journey and even before they come to Canada in instances. To the point on discrimination and racism, I think we also need to start accepting that it's very human of people to be scared of things they don't know or and they're not familiar of. It exists, and I don't think it will cease to exist either. I think what we can do is we can all try our best collectively to make the unknown less scary for people, and that in itself might eliminate or at least reduce most of those instances. But it does need a collective effort from all of us, and I just try to say to most newcomers, at least that I meet, is that it's never going to go away. It's more of the strategies and tactics that you bring to it that can make it stronger. And of course, we do our best in terms of being able to address it through the programs we're all offering to employers that directly work with employers. So I think these are mainly the points that I have for other challenges. Thank you.
Okay, over to Alexandra.
Thank you. I guess to add to everything that I think we all experience similar challenges because we work with a number of stakeholders and then participants in our programs. I would add to this, because my role was data collection. Data collection can be a challenge, and it's really important for the project and then of course after the project. And data collection, I think Rachel mentioned it, involves Rachel mentioned a survey. So we had a needs assessment survey early on in the project. So we needed to have a reasonable response rate to find out. We knew what we were doing with the project, but we still wanted to make sure that we're addressing everything and hitting all those points. So what were the any barriers that we may be missing. So that took a lot of time and effort to get the response rate that we wanted and to get the employers to respond to us. And similarly, at the end of the project, conducting evaluation, it's always a challenge trying to ask someone for their time when they don't really have that much. So it is about finding a good way to approach that and using a good old-fashioned phone as opposed to emails or just sending it. So that always works much better. I think one of the challenges was matching mentors and mentees in this process. That was a really important piece of our project, and it was important to match the industry expert, somebody who was going to, mentor the person and share their experience, and the newcomer. Luckily, we had a really amazing project coordinator, Bizu Much, who was really living and breathing the project at the time, and was connecting personally with people, talking on the phone to ensure that they match in terms of just personalities and everything else. um, I think those are some of the having a dedicated person is really important for any of these projects. And I know this then dives into resources, and do we have enough resources for this? Another challenge, and maybe something that would have been really, really good for this project, is having a lot more exposure and visibility throughout the project in social media, and talking about it again requires a lot of time. Um, but that would have been wonderful. What we did find is that our participants were using LinkedIn as one of those platforms to, connect and talk about their activities and what they were doing. So they would pick up where maybe we couldn't, and that was really wonderful to see. There was a lot of sharing of experiences, and that's kind of how we ended up being a little bit more visible in terms of MERN. So those would be, again, we come down to sometimes these resources, but we are resourceful even within what we have. So I can still say that it was certainly a success.
Thank you for that. And I feel like it leads in really nicely to the next question. I'm going to go to our panelists first, but I'm going to welcome you back to the conversation, Wendy, because I'm sure that you're going to have something to say about this as well, which is, I wonder if you can just spend a couple minutes talking about how your initiatives tried to build in that cycle of continuous improvement and the understanding of impact, above some of the challenges that you shared already around evaluation and survey collection. And to talk just a little bit about, the role that data collection plays in understanding this, thing called newcomer integration and how it can help us make better decisions. And I'm going to start with Alexandra. This is your first go.
And I just mentioned, yeah, thank you. And I just mentioned that we really wanted to do that needs assessment in the project, and we were focused on evaluation at the end of the project to see what worked, what were the challenges, what were the successes. And for us, it was because it was a 2-year project, so it's a long time to keep the momentum going of organizing events, connecting people, connecting newcomers to employers. For mentorships were 3 months long, 3 months long each. So we really wanted to ensure that we are collecting feedback and comments from everybody who was involved, because it gave us enough time to respond to anything that required any change, or anything that we needed to adjust. So we did conduct. I was part of that developmental event evaluation, observing what was happening and working with Bizu Much, the project coordinator, who was collecting feedback from mentors. We had forms that we distributed to everybody. Now, again, we were asking employers for more work. It's a risk, but I think they were once they were part of the project, and once that relationship was built, and once they got to know their mentee, everything became a lot easier because of that trust, because of understanding that they're working for somebody, with somebody who's very professional. One of the things that we wanted to leave to newcomer participants was, to advocate for themselves, because we believed that they could do that, and that's what this network allowed. but we wanted to see that feedback. We wanted to see how the employers were finding the process, the structure of the mentorship, how successful were the events that we organized. So each event had um, required a feedback at the end. And then finally, we wanted to conduct a final evaluation with, again, a survey and some interviews to see how everybody from staff involved in the project to employers and newcomers, how they found the network. Did it work for them? Was it beneficial? Um, Once the evaluation was done, I thought that there was so much more to this project and so much more to uh, dig deeper into, that I really thought that there's some further dissemination would help to share this. And I actually approached Future Skills Center to write a blog based on the project and on our findings, and based on some additional research that I did on networks and the benefit of networks, to publish the blog. So any dissemination was really important to us, because this was a 2-year project that was coming to an end. And while the relationships were maintained, what was the knowledge that we developed and received that we could then share with others that may be useful. So that's part of that. And I also want to say that the Association for New Canadians regularly tracks outcomes of the programs that they do, and conducts research. So there's a lot of data out there that is useful, that can then lead to new projects, hopefully new funding, and better programming.
Thank you for that, Alexandra. I'm going to go to you next, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, Alexandra did a nice job of covering a lot of pieces, so I'm going to keep my part short. We also did quite a bit of data collecting and evaluation, from pre-surveys to end of session surveys and 1-year follow-ups and so forth. I mean, all of it's important for understanding immediately what's going on, getting the feedback to maybe adjust the program. But because with career advancement, it is an ongoing process that is not quick. What was really critical for us was having our funding continued so that we could do 1-year follow-ups, and we could circle back with managers and organizations and immigrant employees to see what the impact has been, and to see if what we had done had a lasting effect, or if people just immediately forgot about it. So the fact that we were able to go back and find out that, yes, people are still using what they learned, that managers are still making that effort to better support newcomer team members, and that immigrants who had been in the program are advancing and are still using what they've learned to be able to navigate career advancement more effectively, that was really important. So I'll just pass things over to Rania at this point.
Yeah, over to you, Rania.
Same continuous improvement, though, is pretty central to the FAST program design, especially at a time and age where workforce and labor needs are very always changing very rapidly. We do, as everyone else, as part of the evaluation, we do collect and analyze data at every stage. We work very closely with Blueprint on that, from participant onboarding to post-program employment outcomes. And because the program itself is of a learning nature, we also capture and collect data of, like, UX, and, how long people spend here, or, which are the favorite parts. And we ask people for feedback throughout. It does enable us to refine and assess the program consistently, enhance learning modules, and really improve the user experience as we go. Sometimes we don't act as fast as we should, but at the end of the day, it is all part of the plan. the challenging process, and we were already addressed this, is that ensuring that the data we collect is comprehensive and accurate, and involves everyone, and includes everyone. There's a fine line between knowing, prioritizing collecting data and surveying people to death at some point. The retention levels becomes they dwindle down as you go through, especially when, just like Rachel said, you're trying to do a systemic change, and so you need it over time. And so being able to keep that consistency is always a challenge for sure. But again, as Rachel said before, we've addressed this through implementing regular feedback loops, both for participants and employers, that allow us to make those data-driven adjustments. And we don't do it just through 1 or 2 programs. We do it consistently across the work that we do. For example, the Immigrant Employment Councils of Canada, it's a national network of 12 immigrant employment councils. We've recently come together and got funded for a project that is supposed to strengthen feedback channels with employers. And I see one of the questions there about, like, how can we strategically work with employers? I think it's and instead of leaving it to frontline workers, as I read it, when we work in collective partnerships of such, and this is what we do through those feedback loops, is being able to build a structured mechanism to continuously not just get the same feedback from employers, but drive and drill deeper with them on what this feedback really means and how it impacts. It's great that we all say credential recognition is always a problem. What does it really mean? How does it really impact your workforce? This is where we try to drive down with employers, for example, and same thing with newcomers as well. So data does play a crucial role in improving the program and understanding, like, the broader trends in both newcomer integration, both from the newcomer side and the employer side. And this helps both us and partners make informed decisions about where to focus resources and how to support newcomers more effectively.
And Wendy, I know you've
Yeah,
got something to say.
Yeah, I think lots been covered, but I mean, part of the, I'm sure this was explained at the beginning, but the Future Skills Center's mandate is not as a program funder. The Future Skills mandate is really to better understand what the evidence tells us about what works for whom, which kinds of initiatives should be replicated and scaled, what we can do at an ecosystem level, and so on. So the data is absolutely fundamental. And, people have mentioned some of the tools, using surveys, using stories. Some of the projects here are very small with 10 or 15 people versus, the randomized control trials with 800. And so we need a range of approaches. But I think what's absolutely fundamental is to recognize that the relationships with the participants often have a profound impact on whether they'll give you the information that you want. And that applies to service providers, clients, as well as employers. And so, one of the biggest mistakes I think people make is treating participants like, rats in an experiment, as opposed to building those relationships. And at the end of the day, our goal is to influence public policy, to influence program design. And so the way in which we can take the lessons that are being learned to actually strengthen the employment and skills ecosystem is really what the objective is. And that's why, quite honestly, the cost benefit analysis, the return on investments, all of those sorts of metrics become a piece of the story. And I'm really pleased that one of the things the Future Skills Center has been able to do is build more consistent frameworks for understanding impact, understanding the difference between a pilot project with 15 people and a randomized control trial with 800. It's not that one is better or worse. It's just they're different kinds of insights. Understanding that you have to be prepared, in my view, to apply a gender and diversity lens to what you're doing and really look at the disaggregated data. Quite honestly, when we developed ADAPT, we had a broad category of equity deserving groups, which included women, racialized people, persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, and those who identified as 2S LGBTQ+. We also asked questions about immigrant status and ethnicity and language and so on. And we were really surprised at what we found. But having sort of consistent tools, using administrative data, that's where Magnet is so powerful because it tracks everything. We need to build capacity, in my view, across the sector to do that better, because it has an impact on spending our money wisely. It has an impact on, making really important policy decisions. And frankly, the stories, the qualitative stuff that we end up with is often what is most powerful in terms of winning hearts and minds. So, I am a professor, but I'm only interested in research that drives change.
I think that's another perfect segue into our next question, because it's to the group about, how can the broader ecosystem, we're talking about governments, employers, service providers, better collaborate to support newcomer integration overall, as well as career growth? Who wants to start?
Can I just kick it off? Because
Sure.
the argument that I've been making about newcomers is exactly the argument we made and we won when it came to women entrepreneurs. And that is, often in government, there's a stream of funding. Here's the money for women entrepreneurs. Check the box, off we go. What was unique about the women entrepreneurship strategy is it was a whole of government approach, which meant, yes, they did put specific money in targeting women, but every single department across the government had to think about the impact of their programs on women entrepreneurs, whether it was agriculture, whether it was infrastructure, whether it was energy, and so on. And for me, that is what's critical in dealing with newcomer and immigrant integration, is we need a whole of government approach. So every single department has this as part of the lens. In the same way we talk about GBA plus, we're really bullish on the idea of a gender and diversity lens being brought to every single policy and program. I'll give you an example. The 50-30 challenge was designed to increase gender parity and diversity in leadership roles, boards, and/or executive roles across sectors. They focused on equity, the designated groups in the employment equity legislation, plus Black people, plus the 2S LGBTQ plus community. They didn't mention immigrants, but guess what? The majority of Black people are immigrants in Canada, right? A very high percentage of racialized people in Canada are immigrants. And so what we've done is, and that involved 2,000 plus organizations are part of that. We've just woven a little bit of focus on immigrants into the diversity assessment process. So it's not like we have a separate program for immigrants in terms of leadership and advancement across these 2,000 companies. It's that we just weave it in as part of the cluster. And I think a whole of government approach that includes immigrant as one of the lenses that's applied to policy and programs would be transformational.
Feedback from anyone else? Who wants to Rania?
I'll go. Yeah. Strongly agree with what Wendy just said. It's like so true. And to add to that, one of the things we've seen is that collaboration across the ecosystem is 100% essential for successful newcomer integration. I think we all forget sometimes that, sometimes we're just like Wendy said, like we're given funding pots or funding money or dollars to be able to work only with newcomers, when at the end of the day, a newcomer is a person who is trying to, to integrate and be included in society. So they don't see themselves as that. They need a seamless experience. And yet we always compartmentalize all those little things. And so it feels like a very a rocky ride for them, because most of the time they need to be handed over from one place to the next, and someone is saying, no, I don't do this and I don't do that, and we don't. And that's why we need to do a better job at collaborating really well together, to be able to provide that seamless experience. So government can really play a role in providing funding and policy supports, and providing that lens and policy that Wendy just talked about. And employers can contribute and be incentivized and motivated to contribute by participating in both program design and offering opportunities, employment opportunities to program graduates and immigrants in general as well. And service providers are very crucial in delivering the program, frontline staff and organizations that have direct services in delivering the program and providing the on-ground supports. And we have, for example, found at IECBC that creating formal and strategic partnerships, as well as regularly convening all those partners to share insights, updates, and effectively foster that collaboration, contributes to better program design on all parts and better outcomes overall and better experiences for the newcomers and for employers for that matter. So it's really just about building a network where each partner understands their role and the collective goal of supporting newcomers and immigrants in the workforce, and in their career navigation and growth as well. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Rachel, Alexandra, anything to add on that?
Well, I'd certainly second what Rania had said, and certainly what Wendy had said. I just wanted to add a short piece saying that, really it comes down to this is coming down to structural barriers that people are finding. And there hasn't been a lot of shifting in that, and that needs to be addressed. And that's something that government certainly has power to do. Certainly policy changes that would perhaps recognize immigrants as an equity deserving group, and that employers would have to be forced to think about immigrants as an equity deserving group, recognizing that although Canadian experience, at least in Ontario, people can't be required to have Canadian experience as part of a job hiring decision, but it's still, employers are finding ways to still use that even after someone has been hired into their field, even after they've proven themselves in their job, it's still being held against people that their experience and credentials were gained outside of Canada, and that's problematic. So these are some of the higher level things that need to be addressed. I mean, certainly the partnerships and the programs can work within the system as it exists, but those systemic barriers really need to change if we want to see big change.
Thank you. Alexandra?
Again, I agree with everything, and I agree that employment is one piece of the puzzle. Laying down the infrastructure for many other things is really important. I know here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we've been working really hard on increasing retention, immigrant retention. And again, employment is one piece of that, but we have a number of other issues to look at, such as housing and childcare and transportation. And so all this plays a really important role in retaining people and making them, happy in what they do if they are professionals and they are attached to a really meaningful position in their profession. So addressing all that together and understanding how they impact each other is really important. I do know that there's a lot of work, and I did mention that our immigrant numbers have increased significantly over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of work being put into all the aspects of that retention of newcomers here, and it does require significant research. I wanted to mention currently I'm working on a job transition pathways project with the DAIS from Toronto Metropolitan University in collaboration with the DAIS. And we're looking at, transitioning workers from, declining occupations to those that are projected to grow. And we're looking at also immigrant population, and to see, how can we best support people who may have to transition into new jobs or be upskilled or reskilled, to be in a better position to stay here. And also, what are other significant aspects that we need to ensure and meet for them to for that to happen, for those successful job transitions to happen? So we're looking at that as well, and it is a collaborative project with um, federal and provincial government. There's a lot of interest and involvement and commitment, and I can just say we need more of that.
Thank you so much. I'm glancing at the time and realizing we are almost out of time. Thank you so much for this lively and insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot from listening to you, and just want to thank the panel for their contributions and the ongoing work that you're doing. And I will pass it back to Ghazala.
Thank you, Laura. I just want to close as well with thanking this very community present here today, from our communications and interpretation team to our speakers, and most importantly, to all of you in attendance who have taken the time to establish the importance of our collective work that now transcends through your personal and professional path in leveraging newcomer talent to empower Canada's workforce. We truly want to thank you, and we want to know how we did today. So please, we just ask that you take one more moment to complete the survey that will pop up right at the end of our webinar on behalf of the Future Skills Center. Until we meet again, take good care.